All right. Welcome to another edition of Shabbat Lounge. This is Matt.
And Jake here.
We appreciate you coming today, tuning in. And what are we talking about today, Jake?
This is Talking Torah with Matt and Jake, Sabbath Lounge, week 13, and it is called Shemot.
Shemot it.
Shemot, which is what?
Names.
Where do we find this section of Scripture?
This is going to be in Exodus 1, and then it's chapter 1 through 6:1.
Yes.
So I was like 116?
1161.
All right. Anyway, that's where we are, and we're going to take a look. We're talking about clearly Moses and, the deliverance, and this is kind of the beginning of that story. So it's a pretty awesome story. Many of you are probably fairly familiar with this story.
Yeah, and when we first kind of came to Torah and started getting serious about sharing the stuff with the kids and, raising them up in it, Exodus was a great place to start. A lot of the concepts and stuff in Genesis are real difficult for kids to pick up. So, but Exodus, it's very relatable in that you can, kind of follow this. It's like an adventure that you're following. Whereas Genesis is a lot of explanation and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, and a lot of Exodus you can kind of act out with the kids, which is fun. And it keeps them, kind of tuned into what you're reading. So
yeah, no, that's a good point. And it's a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
So that's always good.
Yeah, after every section you're like, oh no, what's going to happen next?
Yes.
What's going to happen next?
Stay tuned next time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. All right, well, Exodus 1:1, and so this image may be blurry. I apologize for that, but, the original land grant that Abraham was promised, if you draw a line on a map, it kind of, this represents the original piece of land that was supposed to be the promised land.
Right, we think it's like this real small section up in here where the river, the Red Sea kind of comes up into the land a little bit. We think it's like right here. Well, where Israel is now, we think is all that it was.
And I think for sure that is the choice. The most beautiful part of it, probably. But it's a much bigger place, and it's got to be fairly big because there's going to be a lot of people that go here one day. So, in the greater Exodus, the second Exodus, and I challenge you, if you haven't studied that out, you should look at that. But anyway, so that's the land grant, and then pretty early on in this story, we read about Moses going to Midian, and so where's Midian? Who are these people? So.
Well, it's just a stone's throw from Egypt, right?
Yeah, it's just a stone's throw.
But that when you look at it on the map, it looks kind of far.
Yes.
It looks like he got out of Dodge.
That's right. That's right. So in Midian, and it's also located to the real Mount Sinai. And so this is in modern Saudi Arabia. And so we do not believe that. So if you look in the back of most of your Bibles, you're going to see a map that shows that Saudi Arabia was, in this section here, kind of where the
Mount Sinai
is. The real Mount Sinai. But that's not. We don't believe that that's the real one. That is one that I believe maybe like Constantine's mother or something said, "This is it." And so,
yeah, it all goes back to. That's kind of what the Catholic Church decided was the real thing, and
I don't know why. I don't know why they decided that, but.
Yeah, but the evidence that we've seen more points to this Saudi Arabia.
Well, there is a burnt mountaintop over here.
That's not that. So don't worry about that.
Yeah, and so anyway, it helps understand that kind of where Midian was and who they were. So, Jake, will you read this out of 2 Chronicles?
No, I will read it out of 1 Chronicles.
Yes, 1 Chronicles.
Chapter 1, verse 22. Now the sons of Keturah, Abraham's concubine, she bare him Zimran, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua, and the sons of Jokshan, Sheba, and Dedan.
So, Jake, do you think this Midian is the same person that this land gets named after?
It's very likely because they're 4 generations from Joseph, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that they're living in the land, and Midian was around before they left Egypt, so
Yeah.
it would make sense that the time frame kind of lines up.
It does seem to line up, too, with the principles we see where there are definitely other places and they get named after someone.
Right.
So it's not too big of a leap to say it's the same person. So we have Midian, and so why is he important? Well, if you look at the lineage, it goes back to Abraham, and Midian was a descendant of Abraham through Keturah, and Jethro comes down that line. And so Jethro, who, it appears that he is a priest, and so he is not of the lineage of a Levite priest, but maybe in the order of, it doesn't say. This is pure speculation, but could be Melchizedek kind of priesthood, but it definitely... At one time, I thought Jethro was a pagan priest, but I don't think that was right.
I think that's the standard thought whenever you see a priest outside of, the normal line. But we have to remember there were other people groups all over the place.
Well, what do you think they do that with the Midianites specifically? What do you think the assumption is made? They're pagan.
I think people tie the Midianites to... Well, I think they had some pagan practices going on.
Sure.
And I think, do they also tie that to Cain somehow? Or
I mean, we did see that, but we also see, wasn't it the Midianites with Balaam and the donkey and the Midianite women that lead them to idolatry? So we do know that they were known for idolatry, but that doesn't, we just talked about how, America is known for a lot of bad things, Hollywood being one of those, and just because we're Americans doesn't mean we have anything to do with Hollywood. And I think that Jethro may have been upset. I don't think Jethro would have been pagan. I think it just makes sense that Moses, because the rules were set that a Levi, that a priest had to marry from a certain lineage, and Yahuwah had this lady over here reserved just for Moses out of the right lineage, just waiting on Moses to find her.
Yeah.
And he did.
Yeah, I don't think it's a stretch to say that a good person could have come out of a pagan society, and that Moses, through divine appointment, was set up with Jethro. I mean, I don't think it was an accident, just like Rebecca at the well and any of that, but I think it was meant to be.
So it's just an interesting line to study, and if you too have thought like I did that maybe he was this pagan priest, you might check into it a little bit.
And I think too, one of the things that we tend to do is throw a label on something without really knowing, and then. But I think we need to be careful that we're not calling something that Yahweh calls good bad, and
don't
vice versa.
That.
So. So if he was like a pagan priest, we don't want to be calling him a good, a good priest. But just in terms of where the evidence kind of leads, I think you could say that Moses is on the right track with this.
It would be very confusing if later you do find out that they were all pagan and Moses gets this advice from a pagan. You're like, what?
Yeah, why is he taking...
That's weird.
Right. While he's looking to Yahweh, he's taking pagan priest advice.
It doesn't seem consistent.
And no
mention of it.
No kickback against it either.
And so I just quickly Googled Jethro, who he was, and you can find this information pretty easy, like on the Britannica website. And, it confirms that they were known to be out of the Arabian desert, which is kind of next to Egypt. So, Jake, what do you think? What would the advantage to the Midianites being close to Egypt? What do you think that was an advantage to them?
Well, kind of as we were talking before, it seemed like most of the known world, had kind of been swallowed up by Egypt when the famine came, and these people in Midian were able to stay separate from that and didn't end up selling off their land and their flocks and all that. But they could run into town. It might be a few days' journey or whatever, but they could run into town if they needed supplies, kind of like the trading post, if you will.
Yeah. And I also think
heading out to Fort Worth for the weekend, kids.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think it also shows that the remnant, and that there's just always a remnant of people. A lot of times we think we're the only ones, and it turns out there may be a whole bunch of other people sitting there ready to help, and you're not aware of them. Just because you're not aware of them doesn't mean they don't exist.
Right. Yeah, and like we were talking, it's not like I don't know that it's a stretch. We always get focused on Israel at this part of the scripture, but there were all these other nations going on too, and what kind of remnant was in there, and what people groups knew about Yahweh there.
Yeah. So then would you read this Numbers 12?
And Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. They don't like that.
I don't know. It does seem interesting for sure. But it does establish that the Keturah, or not Keturah, Moses' wife Zipporah, wasn't from there. Yeah. And she is not from, necessarily from this right lineage, maybe part of what's being said here. But technically she was, and they just had a limited perspective probably on it. They didn't really know. But it does show that the Midianites were kind of nomadic, and they may have spent some time in Ethiopia before they, probably in reality, this is pure speculation, but, they may have wandered around in Africa and then as that famine hit, that pushed them up to where they ended up in Midian so that they could be close to get food.
Could be.
But I don't know, just interesting, just trying to figure out who Jethro is and Keturah. And then Genesis 15, 14 through 16.
And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full.
So 4 generations to us today in America. Jake, what does that make you think of? How long of a span?
I think generations is probably, I don't know, like 70 some years, 75 years, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
By 4. So not 430.
No, it is.
I don't think that.
We read that and we think a much different thing. And so it does lead to some confusion. I've been confused about this before. And, you read 4 generations, you're like, oh, that's not that long, but they lived longer.
Yeah, well, you're only one generation away from losing your freedoms.
That's right.
Freedom is 1 generation away from extinction, I think is the way it goes.
That's a good quote.
Hang on, let's go back a verse, a slide. Let's see. There's something I wanted to mention about. Oh, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So remember, when he's bringing them out, it says that he's bringing out his army, and part of the reason bringing them out is for judgment on other nations, and the Amorites being one of them. And he knows that they are going to, sure, they're evil pagans right now, but they have not fully succumbed to that yet. Just like Sodom, when its time came, and the Amorites, he knows the time is coming, but it wasn't yet. So he has this 4 generations that he knows that's when it'll be the time to send out his army and get them.
Yeah,
basically,
that's
and
good.
Bring down the judgment.
That's real good. And then Exodus 12:40.
The length of time that the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430th year, to the very day, all the ranks of Yahweh departed from the land of Egypt.
So we know it's 430 years. And so this is the lineage, close-up of the timeline of Moses, Aaron, shows how they're all related
Mm-hmm.
and connected. Except for Jethro, it doesn't really fill in the gaps on him very good on this timeline.
Yeah. There's this big gap.
It's just kind of floating out there.
Yeah.
And then this breaks down how it is how it gets to be 430 exactly. So I thought this was a really good timeline, breaking down how old everyone lived and shows the generations, which makes sense.
Yeah.
And it adds up. I didn't check his math, but that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
All right. So Moses is the grandson of Levi. So puts him in that priesthood lineage, which he can be a priest. Moses gets the girl by pulling. So in Jasher, and so I know it's an extra biblical text, and I do think it's wise to take those things with a grain of salt. And Jasher may be every word true, or I don't know, but I do think it's interesting. You have a story in there about this staff was handed down from Adam, and eventually somebody plants it in the ground, and Moses comes up one day and he's like, what's this stick in the ground? And he was like the only one ever to pull it out of the ground. They're like, whoa, that's and that's one of those things like where every kid came up and was like, and Moses was like,
yeah.
And he became the chosen one. So it's kind of interesting because, we do read a lot of these stories, and one of the stories is Sword in the Stone. And I think a lot of those stories have a root in something that actually happened. And It's not too far of a stretch to go, yeah, it's plausible. I'm not going to say it, is absolute biblical fact that happened that way, but it's very plausible.
Yeah. I mean, stranger things have happened.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but anyway, the whole interesting thing about he gets the girl at the well. Long line of people getting girls at the well.
Just hanging out at the well.
Local watering hole.
I bet ladies' parents were, when you go to that well, you mind your P's and Q's, as they say. And
that's right. There are probably lots of instructions about going to the well.
Yeah.
And maybe lots of girls dreamed about going to the well, after this. Like, oh, maybe I'll meet my man of my dream. Maybe I'll meet my Moses at the well.
Yeah.
And
like, be careful of those skater boys hanging out at the well.
Lots of young men, too, going, oh, Dad, you need me to go to the well?
Yeah, I could lift a stone off of that well. That was...
That's what the guy said. Wasn't it Isaac?
Yeah, something like, yeah.
He's like... Need that well? Yeah. I can do a lot more, ladies.
Watch, I can pet this sheep.
Yeah,
there's always sheep there too.
Times are different, Jake. All right, so Moses, he was 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in the wilderness, 40 years as a leader.
Interesting.
Lots of shepherding. Do you think he smelled like sheep?
I'm sure he did.
Yep. So definitely interesting that he has all this experience.
Especially in the rainy season.
Yes. That he had all this experience leading the sheep, and then he really leads the sheep. I mean,
yeah. And he was high up in Egypt, right? Mm-hmm. He was in the Pharaoh's house.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he had some leadership under his belt, I think. But he also had some, I think when he went to Midian, I think it was a humbling experience for him because it was a big change in what he was used to, I'm sure. And
you might say it took 40 years to get the Egypt out of him.
Yeah.
If it took 40 years to get it in him, it took 40 years to get it out of him.
Maybe, yeah.
And then he was ready.
Yeah.
But, it's another thing. It's hard to imagine that at 80, you're starting your ministry.
Right.
Most of us are like, what?
Yeah, what's he waiting 80? For?
We've been retired like 20 years at that point.
I know it.
And he's just starting.
Do they talk about retirement in Scripture?
I don't think so. I don't think that's biblical.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, I mean, it does give us a sense of how patient Yahweh is, and how long it could take us to learn His ways, and once we start studying this stuff and understanding Him a little bit more, and we're living in Egypt now. I mean, so.
And especially patience coming from a generation who stands in front of the microwave going, oh my gosh, how long is it going to take this popcorn to pop? 3 minutes? I don't have 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And people, everyone before us would be like, what? You can get food that fast
Yeah.
with that little effort?
Yeah. Or your website doesn't come up in 1 second.
Yeah.
Instead, it takes 1.5
like,
seconds, and you're like, click, 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 click.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of ridiculous, the things we complain about.
Yeah. We're terrible.
Yep. So I think that concludes week 13, Shemot.
Yeah, that's just the high level points on this Torah portion, week 13. One more thing I wanted to say, and it perfect picture here because it reminds me. This is where the burning bush happens, and he talks with Yahweh and all this stuff, and which is crazy, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
you can easily overlook that story.
It's probably crazier than a staff in the ground.
Mm.
But
a bush that talks to you, catches on fire but doesn't burn.
Yeah. So, real interesting about this, though, when I first heard about this, it was mind-blowing. So, if you already know this, bear with me. All right. So, when you look at the Hebrew there for the bush that's burning, it's a thorny bush. It's they say it's perhaps a blackberry bush. I wouldn't go that far. But thorny bush, I mean, they had a lot of thorny bushes there. Yeah.
I've met a few.
Yeah. And thorns represent sin, right? When they left the garden, it's, that was one of the, that was one of the curses from leaving the garden. And then you think about Abraham and Isaac, when the ram is caught in the thicket. It's a thicket of thorn bushes. And you think about the ark is made of a thorn bush, kind of. It's a thorny wood.
Acacia.
Yeah. And it's overlaid in gold, right? And then you think about Yeshua's crown of thorns. It's always representative of sin. And in this case, you have this thorny bush that's on fire but doesn't burn. So like us, we're a sinful people, a thorny people, and it takes Yahweh's fire to burn in us without consuming us. His fire burns in us without consuming us. And very similar to the ark, right? It's a thorny bush covered in gold. So it's that sinful flesh covered in the atonement of Yeshua, the pureness of it. And so I just think that's real cool. This is one of those spots that's real neat with that.
Yeah.
Ties into that.
That's a great tie-in. Incredible, actually. So, yeah. So definitely study that out more about how the burning bush could represent you and I. That's interesting about, not being consumed.
Yeah.
And he could have easily consumed the bush.
Yes.
Could have been crispy. And it still would have been amazing.
Right.
It still would have got your attention.
Yeah.
Fire gets my attention.
Me too.
So, yeah. Yahuwah knows us, knows man. He's like, fire. Who doesn't like a fire?
Right.
So,
men do like fire.
I know. It's like, oh, what's this?
Yeah. So. And then one more quick point.
Okay.
This is where we see Moses put in a basket and floated down the Delaware. I mean, the Nile.
The Delaware.
Yeah. That reminds me of a song that we used to sing when we were little, and it's probably inappropriate, but has to do with floating down the Delaware.
Okay.
And
must be
anyway,
Pennsylvania thing.
Yeah. So it's more of a Delaware kind of thing.
No.
But which is Maryland, right?
Yes.
Okay. But anyway,
actually, Delaware is its own place.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. So anyway, back to the real point. So he's floating down the Nile, and they cover the basket that he's in pitch, just like they covered the ark from Noah in pitch. And it's like the covering, it's the atonement, right? So so there's covering. There's that idea of atonement there with Moses. So, and he's a representative of Yeshua and that kind of thing.
Oh, and interesting, that's an ark. There's an ark that is floated and saves mankind.
Mm-hmm.
You have another ark that's floated to save mankind again in the Nile, pulling them out of Egypt. But in a minute ago, you touched on something very significant. I do believe that America today very much resembles Egypt, and a lot of things were patterned after Egypt, and I believe that there is an exodus coming for us, and it's so important to understand these patterns and these parallels to understand what may happen in the future.
Yeah.
And so I suggest studying this out, and then pair this with this pairs really well with a little bit of Revelation.
Yeah.
And the plagues you see in Revelation, and it seems to line up very nicely.
Right. So stay tuned for the next couple, because that's what we're going to talk about, that kind of stuff.
Stay tuned for more. So we appreciate you listening to our Torah portions. We try to keep them fairly brief and just kind of we don't spend a lot of time reading through it, but we want you to read through it. We want you to research this and learn more. We don't claim to be experts. We're just merely students like you, trying to learn this as we go. But we appreciate your time, and we appreciate that, somewhere there's a button or something that you can click to subscribe,
share, and like, and
thumbs up, heart
bells,
it, emoji it if you want to. We appreciate all of that. So thank you for listening to Sabbath Lounge.
All right.
Bye.
See ya.